Bojo Knalia, a pegish imnoya pana. We here at Nishnaabemwin in Nipissing and Wang believe peer review is an important process in the education process. However, due to lack of speaker accessibility, scheduling, and these lessons being produced by second language learners, we tend to make mistakes in how Nishnaabemwin is represented. We encourage you to think with a critical mind when watching our videos and question the validity of something said in the video that catches your attention. We are language learners and naturally don't know what we don't know. We don't discourage others from helping us out by educating us, and if you see a mistake you would like us to rectify, you can do so by contacting the email in the video description. We also ask for your patience in waiting for edits, because it is a long process to edit mistakes we share in our videos, and there is the possibility that it might not align with the speakers of Nipissing First Nation. Miigwech bisinduyang, wewehenag nawamdamuk.
On in Bojo Kanalia, Mr. McLeod Mondayamina, Bajinaka Queen Ween Monim. I just want to let you guys know that links to the dictionary, PDFs to the worksheet, audio files are in links in the description of this video, as well as any other resources that'll help you out with this lesson will eventually be there as soon as I'm done making them. Aho, miigwech. On in Bojo, Mr. McLeod Mondayamina. And today's lesson is VTA B form negative inflections, part niche. We're still forming dependent clauses with our VTA words. Previously in Nishnaabemwin, we covered a wide variety of A form and B form VTA inflections using simultaneously prefixes and suffixes to manipulate our VTA words. Today's lesson, we are learning how to incorporate more B form suffixes into our VTA inflections. As always, when adding suffixes, our second last consonant rule is in effect. We also covered grammatical agreements, tense markers, question particles, adverbs, and grammar patterns to facilitate multi-clause sentences. All those grammatical aspects will be used and practiced throughout the remainder of the course and its work. Lesson itinerary. In today's lesson, we'll be dividing it up into 3 sections, explaining the various aspects to contextually understand and model B-form negative inflections with our VTA words. First section will be an explanation of dependent clauses in B form. Second section will articulate grammatical agreements and grammar patterns. Third section will model B-form negative paradigms of this week's inflections. When we learned A-form negative, we followed the grammatical agreement start negative and end negative. This is where we begin the sentence with some variation of the Ojibwe word for no, that's either gawin, gone, or ka, and end the verb with the appropriate negative suffix. In B-form negative, we do not use a word like gawin, gone, or ka for negative sentences. The suffix by itself communicates polarity, positive or negative, pronoun, person, and direction. Here's the point for you to write down in your notes. Make sure to get it down before we move on to the next slide. Miske ambe. Part basic, dependent clauses, also known as B form. B form dependent clauses. Today's class will be about learning B form inflections for our VTA words. So far, we've been learning how to express A form or independent clauses with our VTA words. A clause is a phrase that contains a verb, also known as a predicate, and a noun or pronoun as the subject. Here's the point for you to write down in your notes before we move on. Make sure to get this down before we move to the next slide. Miske ambe. So we have the sign up, meaning that you should write down all these points before moving on to our next slide. In Nishnaabemwin, we have A form, B form, and C form. These are names we give to the types of clauses. A form or independent clause is simply a phrase that contains a noun, also known as a subject, and a verb predicate that sounds like a complete thought. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here and write these notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskaya, ambe. Independent clauses versus dependent clauses. An example of an independent clause is, the dog sees the cat. It makes sense on its own without further information. You don't need any further information to understand what is happening. We have the sign up again, meaning you should write down these points before we move on to the next slide. An example of a dependent clause is, if the dog sees the cat. Notice how our dependent clause feels like it needs more information. It sounds incomplete. That's what makes it dependent. It's reliant on further information. This is what we call B form or dependent clause. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here and write these points down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskaya, ambe. A form versus B form. In Nishnaabemwin, we use terms like A form, B form, and C form to describe what kind of clause we are discussing. A form or independent clause is the simplest to understand and use in our speech. We have the sign up, meaning that you should write these down before we move on to the next slide. B form or dependent clause is the most popular clause native speakers use because it shares common inflection paradigms with C form and it has the most expressive capabilities compared to our other forms or clauses. B form only appears as suffixes for all 4 types of verbs in Nishnaabemwin. Those are your VIs, VAIs, VTIs, and VTAs. We'll give you a chance here to pause the video and write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskaya, ambe. Part niche, grammatical agreements and grammar patterns. When to use B form inflections. We'll focus on B form grammar patterns to elicit B form phrases. B form grammar patterns will include an initial word that will force our verbs, currently our VTA words, to inflect in B form. Here's the point for you to write down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here and write this down. Miskaya, ambe. Grammatical agreement. Ojibwe uses a lot of grammatical agreements. Grammatical agreements are when 2 or more aspects of grammar are required to be used within the same phrase to make sense. When we use our grammar patterns, this can be understood as a grammatical agreement because we need both our adverbs and B form inflections to communicate specific things. For example, while is megwa plus B form. Megwa ganawen mug a babies while I'm taking care of the baby. From here, we can see to express the concept of while, we need to use both the adverb megwa and our verb needs to be inflected with a B form suffix. A form does not agree for expressing while. Here are the points for you to write down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Pause the video here and write these down. Miskaya, ambe. We have the sign up, meaning that you should write these down before we move on to the next slide. The B form grammar patterns we will be using. Ande plus B form means where. Ande giwa mug anene. Where did I see the man? Anwe plus B form means even though or although. Anwe gi miko jiyad anene. Even though you teased the man. Apegish plus B form means I wish. Apegish gichimug anene. I wish I was able to talk about the man. Bochje plus B form means have to. Bochje no swinug anene ngoje. I have to follow the man somewhere. Kishbin plus B form means if. Kishbin wa mid anene, if the man sees me. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here and write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. J plus B form means to or so. Jigshke wa mig anene, so the man can see you. Jibwa plus B form means before. Jibwa jo no swinid anene nguje, before the man will follow you somewhere. Megwa plus B form means while. Megwa gignawa mug anene, while I was watching the man. Naj plus B form means until. Naj ganjwe nud anene, until you push the man. P plus B form means when. Pignawa mud anene, when you look at the man. Again, we'll give you a chance to pause the video here, write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. Midash plus B form means and then. Midash gignawa mud anene, and then you are looking at the man. Minwendam plus B form means I like to or that. In Minwendan mikoji yed anene, I like that you were teasing the man. Mi P plus B form means that's when or it's time. Mi P giwa mid anene, that's when the man saw me. First clause plus B form means that. Donchka is giwa mid anene, I'm angry that the man saw me. J shkwa plus B form means after. Jip kitewig anene, gdop kitewa. After the man hits you, you should hit him. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here and write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. Part and swe, B form negative VTA paradigms. We have the sign up, meaning you should write these down before moving on to the next slide. For our M enders, we're going to use the example, gonna wabum, look at him or her. Gonna wab miss one, that you are not looking at me. Gonna wab miss known, that I am not looking at you. For our glottal stop enders, we're using inbe, put someone to bed, and shke, anger someone, and zage, love someone, or be stingy with someone. Inbe swan, that you are not putting me to bed. And shke swan, that you are not angering me. Zage swan, that you do not love me. And be known, that I am not putting you to bed. And shke known, that I am not angering you. Zage known, that I do not love you. We'll give you a chance here to pause the video and write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. For our N enders, we're using pkidin, release, allow, or let go of someone. Pkidnis swan, that you are not letting go of me. Pkidnis known, that I am not letting go of you. For our dummy N enders, we're using no swaj, follow someone. No swaj siwan, that you are not following me. No swan sinon, that I am not following you. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here, write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. For our AW enders, we're using mkao, find someone. Mkawiswan, that you are not finding me. Kawis known that I am not finding you. For our fused W enders, we're using no, point at or to him or her. No someone, that you are not pointing at me. No is known, that I am not pointing at you. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here and write these sounding notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. So here we have the sign up, meaning you should write these down in your notes before we move on. It's in a different place in the screen because of the text takes up a lot of the screen. And so I tried to make this as legible as possible for you guys. For our M enders, we're using chim, talk about him or her. Chamasig ikwe nene, that the man is not talking about the woman. Chimig sig ikwe nene, that the man is not being talked about by the woman. For our glottal stop enders, we're using mikoji, tease him or her, anme, give him or her heck, and bapa, laugh at him or her. Mikoji a sig ikwe nene, that the man is not teasing the woman. Anme a sig ibibi san nene, that the man is not giving the baby heck. Bapa sig ikwe nene, that the man is not laughing at the woman. Mikoji yig sig ikwe nene, that the man is not being teased by the woman. Anme yig sig ibibi san nene, that the man is not being given heck by the baby. Bapig sig ikwe nene, that the man is not being laughed at by the woman. We'll give you a chance here to pause the video and write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. For our N enders, we're using kid in, release, allow, or let go of someone. Kid na sig is as being nene, that the man is not letting go of the rope. Kid nig sig is as being nene, that the man is not being let go of by the rope. For our dummy N enders, we're using no swaj, follow him or her. No swina sig imozon nkwa, that the bear is not following the moose. No swinig sig imozon nkwa, that the bear is not being followed by the moose. We'll give you a chance to pause the video here and write these down in your notes before we move on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. For our AW enders, we're using bizindao, listen to him or her. Bizindawa sig ibibi san kwe, that the woman is not listening to the baby. Bizindag sig ibibi san kwe, that the woman is not being listened to by the baby. For our fused W enders, we're using no, point at someone or to someone. No wa sig ibibi san nene, that the man is not pointing at the baby. No wig sig ibibi san nene, that the man is not being pointed at by the baby. We'll give you a chance here to pause the video and write these down in your notes before moving on to the next slide. Miskoye ambe. Lesson recap. Unlike A form, we will not use any variation of gawin in our B form sentences. B form phrases don't inherently make sense on their own because they are dependent clauses. They rely on further information. For the purposes of your learning, I will try to restrict B form inflections to the grammar patterns shared in this lesson. B form inflections are strictly suffixes for all verbs in Nishnaabemwin. Syncopation is prevalent throughout our B form inflections. Grammatical agreements are very crucial to proper communication in Ojibwe, so make sure your grammar patterns match the ones from this lesson and the suffixes match the ones from our paradigm section. Some suffixes that start with an A sound communicates that third person is the one doing the action. Some suffixes that start with an ig sound communicates that fourth person is acting on third person. VTA enders will morph when certain suffixes are added, so we need to be aware of those from the paradigm section of this lesson. In our work going forward, we will also be incorporating grammatical agreements, tense markers, question particles, adverbs, and grammar patterns to facilitate multi-clause sentences, because those aspects are not affected by negation and could elicit more natural patterns of speech than just plain present tense A-form negative sentences. Mise gek piaja, that's finally it for today.